Welcome to CISO's Insiders Podcast, powered by GRC Consulting. In this podcast, we'll be interviewing leading CISOs and security leaders in the industry for light, eye-level conversations. Here, they share advice and tips, talk about their biggest accomplishments and failures, favorite drinks, key influencers, and much more. We encourage you to walk away with at least one insight that will help you better yourself or your business. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more content, please check us out on social media.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today, I will be speaking to Ryan Miller, the CISO of a company called Mission Search. A bit about Ryan from what I was able to learn online. Ryan is actually a U.S. Army veteran. Upon his discharge, I believe he started off as a system admin before moving on to different roles as a consultant and also served as a virtual CISO for a few companies. Nowadays, as I mentioned, Ryan holds the position of a full-time CISO for Mission Search, staffing and recruitment. I believe it's a staffing company in the healthcare industry. And I'd be more than happy if you could chime in and introduce yourself. Ryan?
Sure, yeah. As you said, my name is Ryan. I first got into quote unquote the industry back when I was going for my electronic engineering degree back 2003 to 2005. I did freelance IT. Did about an 8-year stint in the Army. I say stint because it felt like prison. And I got out and I needed something to do. Had a family. And I was like, hey, I did IT before. I'll go to school for IT. And that's where I took one class on cybersecurity, and it's like, this makes sense to me. And so I didn't know if it was going to be a career. I finished my sysadmin degree, decided to go into cybersecurity. Got a couple IT jobs while I was in school, and then was actually hired on to Mission Search as a junior system administrator. And I was shoring up some documentation. I found a bunch of gaps, a lot of shortcomings. I presented it to the chain of command, and then like, hey, you're in charge of security now. And then I got into consulting after that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, that was during your time in the Army when you?
No, this was after I got out of the Army. Yeah.
Okay, because you said chain of command, so that's just you just stuck to the Army lingo. Okay, got it. Okay, but 8 years, that's a substantial period of time to be serving your country, right?
Yeah. It was. I did 3 deployments in those 8 years. The first 2 came relatively quick within the first 4. Was stationed in Anchorage, Alaska, Fort Richardson, and then PCS or change duty stations down to Fort Bliss, El Paso, which looks just like Afghanistan. I really did not like being there. Anyway, I was there for about 1.5 years, went on another deployment. Then I was back from my deployment for about a year and a half before I got out.
Okay. And I know it's customary in the US to say thank you for your service. So thank you for that. And you mentioned having a family. So because my next 2 questions, are about your marital status and actually your favorite drink.
Right. So the story behind me getting married is unromantic and interesting at the same time. So I was in Iraq in 2007 with my first unit, and I was a truck driver, and I had to take my truck in for a service. And the mechanic that worked on my truck turned out to be my future wife. So she didn't pay any attention to me at first, completely ignored me because she didn't like truck drivers. She thought we were annoying, pesky, didn't want us around. Well, my first line supervisor told me I had to stay there. So I just sat on a bench quietly trying to, create some sort of small talk to pass the time, and she wouldn't even look at me. So I guess my persistence paid off. We ended up going on a date a few weeks after to the dining facility on the forward operating base, or FOB, and the rest is history. So the interesting part about the proposal is we were in the National Training Center getting ready for our second deployment. And we're in the middle of the desert in California. And a bunch of people in the unit had been teasing us like, oh, you know, you two are going to get married. And she was always saying, no, I'm never getting married. And I went into her tent one day, sat on her cot. She was getting ready to go do a training regimen at a control point, stimulated. And I sat down next to her and I go, you know how everyone's saying that we should get married? She goes, yeah. She kind of gives me side eye. I go, we should just do it. She's like, what, really? I go, yeah, let's just get married. And she said yes. So that was the engagement and proposal.
Well, she was playing hard to get, but I guess it paid off. And you know, I couldn't help thinking about this song. You probably know it. It's called "Don't Touch My Truck." Yeah, for some reason, it's one of my daughter's favorites. Okay, that's definitely an interesting story. Moving on to the next icebreaker question here. What's your favorite drink?
It is water with Mio. It's a holdover from my time in the from deployments, because you just suck down water whenever you can get your hands on it. Just get the habit up. I mean, like 90 to 95% of my fluid intake is water. The rest is like juice.
Okay. You certainly spoil the statistics here. You know, usually it's single malt or beer in some cases, but okay.
Well, I mean, I occasionally drink. If I go for beer, it's usually something citrus based, and then yeah, I mean, liquors occasionally. It's usually lemonade and vodka. It's kind of a weird mix, but it works for me. So
okay. So let's get started with the heavier questions here. Looking back on your career, what's the one thing you wish you'd known before you began it?
Yes. So this gave me a lot of problems early on. And it's finding the balance between security and operations. I had this really bad habit because, like I explained, I came in, we had a lot of gaps, we had a lot of shortcomings when it came to security, to mission search. And I got in this mindset of secure because I was kind of panicky, right? I had no visibility into the environment. Had no policies, no processes. I mean, a whole new information security program. And so I always attempted to over secure things. And I finally learned through people on the verge of hating me that, hey, I really need to sit down and gather these user requirements for their workflows, for the services and products they use, and then design the controls around that. Because there will always be a little bit of inhibition when it comes to doing work with security controls, but they can't be so much that they make the user angry or the employee angry, and then you end up with less collaboration.
Yeah, and you know, I think the tension between operations and security, and in some organizations between engineering and security, is always there. And you know, actually, this ties up to one of my follow-up questions about the role of the CISO as part of the IT organization. Because you know, at the end, you also have this tension, and as you probably know, some CISOs report directly to leadership, while others report into an IT leadership role. And it's always interesting to understand like how this tension is being dealt with, and whether it's for the good of the organization or not. And yeah, I'll ask you this question going forward, but I did have a question about what led you into information security, and I feel you partially already answered that. But if you wanted to provide more background, that would be the time.
Yeah. So what led me to it was really, it just made sense from a logical standpoint. And It partially has to do with my time in the military and the way they teach you physical security and controls, mitigation, you know, like barrier standoff distance, you know, serpentines to slow vehicles down, staggering defenses. So from a physical aspect, when I was taught that, obviously made a lot of sense, and it's something I kind of enjoyed. But when it came to the cyber realm and defense, it was a combination of my physical security experience and then my electronic engineering degree. I loved both ideas of defense and then the technical nature of it. And I just kind of got thrown into it. It was something I was eventually going to get into, but then I was just told one day, hey, you're in charge of all security.
Okay. And, you know, this is a question I think I've never asked, but do you enjoy this field?
I absolutely love it. And I see the debate a lot online, you know, passion versus job. And I have a real problem with that, right? Because I can see both aspects, but the cornerstone of information security is harm reduction. In order to be effective at harm reduction, you have to have empathy and you have to listen actively. So when you combine those traits, it's difficult for me to see. Like I said, I can see it, but it's difficult for me to see it, how someone can treat it as just a job. Considering that information security is about people, it's their financial details, it's their medical records. I mean, it wreaks havoc. These data breaches wreaks havoc on people's personal lives and families. And to me, I don't know how you can just treat that as a job.
Yeah, and I've been seeing this a lot lately. Where, you know, I'm speaking to a lot of CISOs, like the sense of a mission, or and combined with passion as well. Actually, I think more individuals than not have actually said that this is what they love to be doing, and you know, some even don't consider it a job. While others love the aspects of continuously learning the field, and you know, because you can always learn more and more security domains, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's not a job when you love what you do.
Yeah.
It comes easy, it comes natural. And speaking to your point about constantly learning, to me, information security is still in its infancy. We're still figuring this all out when it comes to psychology, controls, the best way to do everything, right? That's why best practices are constantly changing. Why we're able to evolve technology and mitigate threats. It's we're still a long way off from what I would consider us being a mature industry.
Yeah, and I think to your point, that's the reason that the most successful attacks are executed through exploiting the weakest link, which is always humans, right? It's always been and probably always will be. Okay, and I know you touched a bit about you know, some failures, but if you could point to like what was your biggest failure and what did you learn from it?
I would say it goes back to towing the line between security and operations.
Okay.
Because that's also a time when I realized that information security was more about the mind than technology itself. Because if you can't get people to buy in to an industry that's in its infancy and people can kind of see a need for it, but don't really understand the need for it, like it's still a very weird space when it comes to the perception of information security in society as a whole, at least in the US. I'll speak to that.
Okay. And you know, that's interesting that your perspective is that security, it's in its infancy. You know, being around the block a few times myself, I've been in this field since year 2000, and you know, if I compare what we have today and the maturity, let's say around, you know, application security, especially nowadays with, you know, Docker technologies, Kubernetes, so maturity around application security, around compliance, even around the awareness that leadership have these days. And I compare it to the year 2000, where information security was considered, if you run a scanner on the network and come up with a list of open ports. I think we've made some significant strides here, but yeah, to your point, I think the human factor that you were addressing, I think that still is the weakest link, for sure.
Yeah. So I know at one point you had remarked that we've come a long way from doing local scans for open ports to now, we have OWASP, we have these really sophisticated detection engines. And my point was that the industry hasn't matured. We've matured quite a lot technically as far as information security goes, but conceptually we're far, far, far away from being mature, right?
And
Case in point.
Yeah.
Case in point. I'll try to make an analogy. I'm not really sure if it works, right? So when you need car insurance, you know where to go for car insurance, right?
Yeah.
You know the terms. You basically know what the coverages are and what you need for the most part. I mean, even going to the doctor, you know the names of body parts and illnesses, and you can kind of grasp what he's saying. Maybe ask some questions so the doctor puts it in more layman's terms. But information security, where does the layperson know to go for that?
So, and I completely agree with you, but I think, this is one of the merits of regulations, because if you're in a regulated environment or in a regulated industry, actually, so you have someone you can talk to. And I think that's, and again, I'm not saying regulations solve everything, but they do provide you with some guidance on in and around specifically like which frameworks you need to address, what it is that you need to do. I do agree with you that, if you're like, a newly minted company in an unregulated industry, so yeah, it's a green field there. And I'm not sure if that was the intent of what you just said or not.
Partially. Let's take it a step further. Mom and dad, right? If they don't have a child that's in the industry, where are they going for information on good security hygiene? For us to take the concepts that we work with at a mid and technical level within the industry to distill them at a high enough level so people's eyes don't glaze over as soon as you say information security, and teach them those concepts and be able to get them to work with those concepts, we are way, way far away from achieving that goal. And I think as an industry, if we can get to a place to where we have near ubiquitous, and just knowing that someone should do something and they know where to go, we'll be a lot better off as a society.
Got it. So you're talking about actually commoditizing cybersecurity, information security, and bringing it down to the B2C space, whereas most of the initiatives are mostly focused on like the B2B, business to business, when you share information and share data. But let me rebuttal that notion with with a bold statement. I personally believe that people nowadays, especially if we're talking about millennials or Gen Z, sorry, I don't think anybody really cares about their, private information, and the fact that everybody's posting everything on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok and whatnot. I don't really think that, people care too much about it. They will care if you steal their money or their credit card, because, that actually, they can feel it like immediately.
Right.
But I mean, and that's just my notion here, right? But I understand. I understood more about what you were saying, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, I completely agree with you, and in this younger generation, they grew up with technology being ubiquitous to where you and me, our late teens, early 20s is when a lot of this really started coming full steam with social media and ads and data sharing in the way we know it today. was a couple years ago, there was a data broker that had a S3 bucket exposed. And it came to light that a lot of these data brokers know more about us than we know about us. And I mean, some of them have 150 to 200 data points on us, previous addresses that we've lived over 10, 12 years, who our siblings are, houses we've bought, cars we've bought, cars we've rented. I mean, there's so much minutia about our lives that they have. It's unsettling, really. And and I think that's another weak point within the industry too, because we've been latent to address it, because we've addressed it within the industry. And I think within industry, we're quite mature, but as an industry as a whole, and truly affecting public policy, public perception, public behavior, we just have so much further to go.
Yeah, but I think I personally, I think it's deeper than that. It's deeper than, just cybersecurity or even compliance, because you're talking about, so, the same rationale that you just used was that was the trigger for, a guy by the name of Alice McAllister to initiate the CCPA, the California Privacy Act, a few years back, because he was very disturbed on, on the amount of data that Google has on us. And I think you used the same phrases there. But so on one hand, you have all those regulations and laws that come into play, but then, how you enforce them and how you educate them, that's a completely different matter. And even in those frameworks and laws, so I wouldn't say that companies can abuse it, but there are so many ways you can circumvent the law. And then once you put a law in place like CCPA, then one can claim that, let's just take now, for example, like the COVID era, right? So where does privacy come into play as opposed to the tension, between what's more important, the privacy of the individual or the greater good? So, and so you create systems that you create complex systems that are getting more and more complicated, and the more complicated the system is, the more it's hard, the harder it is to manage it and to actually make it efficient. And again, at the end of the day, it goes back to the I wouldn't say simple-minded, but it goes back to the layman's. I mean, the normal folks out there don't really care about that. That's my personal opinion, right?
And you're 100% correct about that. But the thing is I would hate for our industry to get caught up in a logical fallacy in that because so many people don't care, it's not something worth pursuing. People should care. They need to care. It's to me, it's an imperative because of what's at stake. And there is a deeper conversation to have when it comes to ethics within these technology companies that collect this kind of data, right? Because capitalism says profit at all cost, even at the expense of lives, which is why we have OSHA, which is why we have Environmental Protection Agency regulations. So there's kind of a crisis of morals almost when it comes to dealing with people's information, because that's people's lives. This data is the manifestation of people's lives, and we need to be cognizant that what we're doing with this data, we're doing with people's lives.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah, and I completely agree, but let me ask you this. So, and I'm not sure how old you are, but can you imagine that, prior to 9/11, let's just, go back in time to, let's say, 1990. Can you imagine what it would look like if
I was 5.
if people, I mean, if the TSA back then came out with those new security requirements, mandating you to remove your shoes before you go up on a plane and go through all those security screening that we need to do right now in the US here, because that wasn't around, right? So it had, I mean, a catastrophe had to happen before, people were able to change their mind, and the mindset change actually. So I'm not saying that I want that to happen here, but I mean, I think as human beings, and again, I might be too bold today, but I think human beings are mostly lazy. Then they don't. I mean, at the end of the day, we only seek our own comfort, right?
Yep. You are not wrong.
especially in this country. And I mean, if so, I think the tension between our own comfort and keeping it safe, secure, and keeping aware, I think that's where we lose all the battles, basically.
Yeah, yeah. You are not wrong at all. And part of that has to do with the nature of information systems, right? There are degrees of separation. So the further you are away from an event, a hacking, but your credit card information was stolen, but it wasn't you, so you're like, I don't care, right?
Yeah.
Until your bank account's drained, and then you're like, oh, now I really care. We need to do something about this.
Mm-hmm.
And so those degrees of separation that are native to our information systems, because I can be handling someone's data that's across the country. I never see their face. I never hear their voice. What does it mean to me, right? Until you see them crying because their life is destroyed because you took a shortcut on a security control, right?
Yeah.
We rarely feel those impacts truly, except at higher levels when we get fines and the FBI or Secret Service comes by and starts interrupting operations. So it's humans, as you said, are notorious for doing the wrong thing. I'm kind of summarizing here, for doing the wrong thing until they're required to do the right thing.
Yeah, exactly my sentiment here. Great. Yeah, I mean, but thank you for the insight and this conversation.
Yeah, real quick, almost slipped my mind. I wanted to touch on what you said about COVID, and when it comes to how do we share information and when do we violate privacy. And I took a couple philosophy courses in college, and I always found, and maybe in this aspect, I'm looking at it a little too simply, but we would get, or the professor, right, would try to get us into these really complicated discussions about what's right and what's wrong. And to me, it was always, what does the least amount of harm? That's what you do.
I'm sorry, I was muted. And for me, it's simpler than that. I'm an avid sci-fi fan, and as a kid, I was reading Isaac Asimov, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the laws of robotics, but they
A little
have
bit.
a little bit. So the first law was, a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. But then at some point in those series of books, they came up with a zero law. So basically the same, just you substitute human being with humanity. And for me, the greater good needs to be in a place where it trumps the individual right. I'm not saying we need to convert to dictatorship or totalitarian regimes, but there has to be a balance, and
Right.
you need to have a lot of checks and balances. But for me, I do think that specifically, like if we consider COVID, specifically with COVID, the greater good need to be able to trump the individual rights here.
Right. Yep.
In some cases, I'm not sure. I'm not saying anything about like forcing anything, but that's just my, again, personal opinion here.
Yeah, I mean it's and it comes down to doing just some quick calculus on it. If I release X information,
Exactly.
is it gonna harm the individual more and not benefit society? Therefore, I don't do it, employing least harm. Or does society benefit at the harm of a single person? It's, I mean, to me, like you said, it's rather simple.
Yeah, same. But touching a bit about your failures, what would you say your biggest accomplishment was?
Being able to teach business leaders that when it comes to making decisions about information security within an organization is more about, isn't just dollars and cents calculus. It has to include empathy, because business leaders, they're like ROI, 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 like ad nauseum, right? If I spend this much money, you know, how much of this regulatory or financial liability am I going to mitigate to make it worth it? What's the cost of the asset? On and on. And that's great. You have to make those. But if you're not approaching it from the aspect that you need to do this, not that you have to do this, it's going to affect your decision making as a whole and what you should and should not protect, even with the dollar and cents calculus.
Yeah. And you know, I know for a fact, testing to myself, when you run a company, you have to be looking at the bottom line. But I get what you're saying. You know, doing it without empathy, especially when it might affect people's lives. And I believe, you know, you're in the health space, so you know, obviously tons of PII and PHI there. It could really affect real humans, real day-to-day lives. So definitely, I understand your point here.
Yeah, yeah. To that real quick, I'm actually in the middle of writing an article. It's been about a year now that I've been writing this article. But we have to deal with vendor management system companies. And basically what they are is they're a middle person between us and the facility. So the facility says, hey, I have a job order. I need you to go get this kind of doctor for me. And then you're going to use this system to upload their records, health records, their, you know, PII, whatever. And so on the facility side, when they view that, they have all of these account controls to where you can limit access to PII and PHI. But on the business associate side, it's free for all. If you have an account within an organizational account, you can see every document. That's how most of them are. And so it's this huge kind of dead area within the high tech space, where there's all this liability, but these VMS companies, one of them straight up told me they don't care. They're like, we develop for the facility side, not really for the business associate side. Because there's some of our recruiters that have to log in to see a status of a job and get certain information, to where just logging in, they can access that candidate's protected health information when they shouldn't be able to, but we have no control over it. So essentially, if we want to do business, our hands are tied using an insecure system. So I'm writing an article on these specific companies that have these very, very poor practices, or just absolute apathy or lack of knowledge for their compliance requirements. So we'll see how that lands when I'm done writing it.
Yeah, you know, I think there's always going to be black holes when it comes to regulators. You know, some groups there that have not been regulated yet, and I know you know, there's some movement around that here in the U.S. So high trust, you know, has been very effective in the health space, but they're rolling it out in such a way that they're going after the big fish first, and they're doing similar. They're having a similar process with the CMMC nowadays, like the DoD. You know, it's rolling out the CMMC with the same purpose in mind, to secure the supply chain. But yeah, I mean, as you said, there's always going to be, like, you know, specific industries or companies that went unnoticed. So, what advice would you give someone wanting to pursue a career similar to yours?
If you want to be successful and you want to make an impact, because everyone judges success differently, right? Some people are like, oh, I want to make 150,000 a year. I'm more result oriented. I'm concerned about the impact and positive change I can make in an organization, a person's life, with what I do. So to them, I would say it's really not a space for egos, because of at the pace things are changing, and at the rate that you make mistakes first coming in, and even throughout your career, you are going to have to die to yourself to get better, to correct those mistakes. Ego gets in the way of that. Ego says, you know, I'm the best at what I do. I've reached the top, I've learned what I need to learn, and you become stagnant. That would probably be my biggest piece of advice.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Now, my next questions, we already touched on it a bit about the role of the CISO as part of the IT organization. And I know you mentioned, the tension between operations and security. And so I can assume that your answer would be about this question, like, what do you feel about the role of a CISO being a part of the IT organization? I can assume that your answer would be that it needs to be in that organization, and it's actually an integral part. This is just my assumption. Correct me if I'm wrong. And actually, I would also like to hear if you see any cons to that structure, as opposed to like reporting directly to another leadership position, let's say the COO or the legal counsel or anything like that.
Right. So when it comes to reporting, obviously each company is going to have their own preferred way, and if it works, hey, it works. If it doesn't work, maybe consider changing it. But as long as there's progress, it's the reporting I really don't care about. To me, security and IT have to collaborate, because if you're not securing it as you're building, and it's tack on security, you're going to have disruptions, you're going to have stress, you're going to have mistakes. So we're going to get to a point where IT and IT security is virtually the same. It's going to have to be, what's the word for it? Cross.
I think cross-pollinating.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and eventually become one department.
Yeah.
Because coming through and having someone on Twitter put it really well the other day. Right now, information security is OSHA. We're the ones that come up behind IT and, are you doing everything right? We're going to audit you. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And so you kind of have like this looking down approach almost. And it can't be that way. We have to be peers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's actually part of my mission, to connect peers together. And we can talk about this. Yeah, we can talk about this offline. What would and as a CISO and as someone that's been in the information security industry for a few years now, I think most of the practitioners there are self-learners, and I like to ask the following questions about what were the best resources that have helped you along the way?
As far as mentorship, or
Well, it could be anything from mentorship. It could be online resources. Basically, you got to the place that you are today, you know, and that was attributed to something. So it's probably, to some, it could be certificates, it could be online resources, it could be mentorship. Well, yeah, basically whatever. It's an open-ended question.
Okay. So I don't know. There's just so many. I don't have any certifications. I'll leave it there. I'm not a big fan of certifications. I think it's a bit of a grift, but anyway. All right. So when it comes to certifications within our industry, they serve a clear purpose, right? They provide employers with proof that you have a baseline knowledge. But so many times when you read job descriptions, you see there's more focus on certification requirements than there is experience by the placement within the job description, right? So a lot of times you see certifications right at the top because that's where they want you to focus. Your most important information for anything typically goes at the top of a description, and certifications are most often up there. But what I find, I guess you could say, concerning, is that there's an emphasis on certifications, which are theoretical knowledge, than there is on experience, which is practical and applied knowledge. And a lot of times, sometimes that's for regulatory compliance, liability, stuff like that. But many times I see other companies following suit that don't have those requirements.
And I think so. I've been in the industry for 21 years now, and I do have a few certifications under my belt. But I can attest to myself that I think it goes hand in hand with industry experience. Because, for example, I took I did one certification a year ago for to become an ISO lead auditor, and it made a lot more sense to me now with all my experience and all my business knowledge than what it would have been if I'd taken it like 10 years ago. And I think a lot of certifications are that way. So, and I mean, you do have like very technical certifications like, CISSP and CEH and OSCP and whatnot. But I do think, and you can abuse everything, right? So you can just abuse the certification and just collect them as trophies. But if you lack the underlying understanding that can only come through industry experience, then you're not, you might be missing the point here. And that's just my opinion, right? But I do feel there is a place for certifications, but I do agree with that sentiment that it's not the holy grail that you should be striving for.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of my point. And you explained it really well, that they do work hand in hand. In fact, certifications can fill in knowledge gaps that you may be missing in your experience just because of how your career's gone and the environments you've worked in. But it's I just, companies that are hiring, I see a consistent overemphasis on theoretical knowledge rather than practical knowledge.
Mm-hmm. So what would your advice be to the hiring personnel then? Not to look at certification, to run through like a different type of test, or what, basically?
Right. So I life is nuanced, right? And within our industry, there's so much always going on that we try to distill things at times, such as in hiring, to the highest level possible so we can make a decision as quickly as possible. And I think that does us a disservice at times. The way I look at a potential hire is I always consider personality, temperament, how they would mix with the team first, which you can get a decent handle on through a good conversation. I don't even want to call it an interview. I converse with people, right? I don't sit there and I don't hammer them with questions. I just talk to them. And from there, I go experience, and then I go education, degrees, certifications, because to me, that always, it's just third to me in importance, because you can have someone that has a ton of experience, but you just can't work with, right? You're quote unquote rock stars with egos, and they're just difficult. Cool, you have a ton of skills, but you're causing disruption so much within the team, within the company, that it's not worth keeping you on or even hiring you. And a lot of times that will come out in hiring conversations, because a person gets relaxed, you build rapport with them. It's almost like a hidden interrogation almost. But that being said, the skills come second, because skills can be taught, right? Teamwork, not having an ego, not being disruptive, that can't be taught. And then certifications really just kind of reinforce the practical experience.
Yeah, and just to reinforce your point here, I just got off the phone not 10 minutes ago with the potential hire that I will be onboarding within a couple of weeks to our team. And he's a great guy. He has like 20 years experience. He doesn't have the certifications that I need, but I'm much more inclined to bringing him aboard and then train him and provide him with all of those certifications needed within like a period of 3 to 6 months, because I believe in him.
Right.
And you know, and that came through conversations, as you just said. Like, we had a couple, actually probably more than a couple, we had a few conversations, and you know, I feel comfortable with it, and yeah, that's the decision that I took not 10 minutes ago, actually.
That's good. That's great. I mean, between college and just having conversations like you and I are having, with other CISOs and security engineers, architects, it really is a cumulative effect, between publications and just learning from other people face to face.
Okay. Yeah, I think, you know, there, I'm not sure how to put it in like psychological terms, but I think there are individuals that are have like you know, that can learn better when it's structured, you know, and this is when you go, you know, and seek out certifications and such. And then there are the free spirits that just, you know, absorb. And then
Yeah.
I think the brains of those two types of individuals are probably wired differently. I mean, again, I'm not I don't know anything about psychology, and I don't know too much about I don't know too much about the brain as well, but this is just my, you know, my own experience and assumption here.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to classifying people as specific learners, we're doing ourselves a disservice. It's a false dichotomy, really, because everyone learns a little bit each way, right? So some people may primarily be a hands-on learner, but there's all aspects of learning is what helps us absorb. And just because we're not good at one doesn't mean we can't use it.
Okay, and you mentioned briefly mentorship. Did you have any like specific individuals that you wanted to mention that that have been the most influential to you?
Yeah, I would say a true mentorship exchange would probably be Rob Fitzgerald. He worked at Green Pages for a time, and he's held some interim chief information security roles, and he has his own company, doing consulting and provides some other services. But I would say kind of passively would be Jake Williams and Leslie Carhart. I absorb a lot from them without much in return.
Okay. Do you mind sharing your, and this is relatively a new question, but do you mind sharing your daily routine? Like what it is that you do to get your updates and what's a typical day looks like?
Yeah, I it's variable. I don't like to get into too much of a routine with my work, because then creatively, when I have to look for business needs, and troubleshoot, I get kind of stagnant. It's just the way my brain works. If I get too much of a routine in one area, it affects a whole bunch of other areas. But typically, where I would get information industry-wise is places like Cyberscoop, Twitter, Portswigger. I get a lot from Curated Intel, which is a cyber threat intelligence group that's on Discord.
Mm-hmm.
Just some fantastic analysts in that group that blow me away with some of the things they do.
Okay, interesting. Now let's talk a bit about vendors, if I might. If you put yourself in the shoes of a vendor just for a moment, what is it that you would do when looking to engage with a new customer? And this will follow up to, I mean, this question will will be followed up by a bunch of other questions related to vendors.
Sure, yeah. So I know what works with me. I haven't really been on the vendor side too much, but I know, speaking to people, it can be frustrating when it comes to sales, because you have quotas, obviously, and some companies like to focus on quantity over quality, and so you get a lot of copy paste sales pitches and not much research done on who they're targeting for their sales. And actually just wrote an article this morning expressing some frustrations on LinkedIn. And the best way I can put it is that once you determine who you want to engage with, do your research. Find out where they're working, what they're working with. I mean, even look at their LinkedIn posts, see if you can find them on Twitter. What are their pain points? And then personalize your interaction to that. It takes time. You can't contact 100 people a day like that. But you'll end up on more vendor lists with companies and possibly sales in the end by having quality communication rather than a quantity of communication.
You know, that's very interesting, because what you're saying, obviously I've heard it before, and you know, I've experienced it as well, both as a recipient of a lot of cold emails and cold calls, and also as, you know, as a provider, although we do not engage in those tactics. But yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting because when I think of it, because most companies, when they want to scale up, they, you know, there's the American way for doing that, right? I mean, you guys invented it, like quotas and you know, put in an X amount of SDRs doing Y amount of calls per day, and then setting the KPIs in place to measure that. And you know, the more I talk with CISOs, the more I realize, like, at least for this group, for the information security community, it's very, I mean, you can't really build a scalable organization in the old way, right? So you, because at the end of the day, and again, I'm not sure like which vendors you're working with, but I can assume that those vendors probably, you know, you probably have some kind of relationship with them from the past. You probably reached out to the network at some point, and I mean, you probably did like a soft research before engaging with any of your vendors. So that's, you know, and it's interesting because the world as a whole still works in the old way that was built up and set up by American corporations, right? That's very interesting, and that's actually, as I told you in our preliminary call, that's actually one of the goals of this podcast, to trying to figure out, like, you know, what works and what don't.
Well, companies like to treat sales like they're building a car. You can't assembly line sales because humans are not cars. They have feelings, they have thoughts, they have annoyances, temperaments, moods, however you want to phrase it. I mean, I get 15 to 20 emails a day, and I scan the email for certain keywords to pick up context. If it's copy paste, I either just straight out block them if I'm annoyed enough at the moment, or I'll say I'm not interested in a reply if I'm in a good enough mood. I'm still annoyed. There's actually one really good example. A penetration test company called Go Secure. I got to give this guy props. Name's Patrick Sweeney. He sent me an email the other day. It was copy paste. We're getting ready to have a pen test. Hadn't had the pen test yet, right? So there's some inaccuracy in the email. I said, I'm not interested right away. I was like, another one of those. But he replied after he went into my LinkedIn profile, found out which technologies we used based off the experience in my profile, and I guess went through some of my posts and started talking to me. He personalized communication. So now he went from, I'm just going to ignore you, to now if we need a red team engagement or a pen test in the future, he's probably going to be top consideration.
And that's interesting. I actually got a similar response on another podcast I recorded yesterday. And you know, so one tip I can share here is that that's the amount of time I got that specific response, that if you take the time and put it into doing a proper research, that helps you basically stand out in the crowd. And you know, it increases the chance of the recipient to start talking with you, basically.
Yeah.
And you know, touching a bit about like sales tactics, what would you say was the most annoying sales pitch that you've encountered? If there's any one, or just in general, like cold calls.
Yeah, I would say the general cold call ones.
Okay.
If I were to point to one directly, it would be those, I want to send you a PDF on this product, where they call into the main line and they have to be transferred to my extension because they want to keep a specific brand at the top of my mind by sending me this PDF on some random product that they have. Those probably have to be the most annoying. And then under that would just be the cold pitches, them just shooting in the dark.
Okay. And what it is that you are looking for in a vendor then?
To me, it's listening. It's partially why I like Sophos so much, because for the most part, they're not perfect at it, but they're one of the better companies I've seen at listening to their customers. I've had concerns. I've brought up to Sophos. There's even been times they're like, hey, you have a concern? Let's do a video chat. And then 2 or 3 days later, I'm on a video chat. They're explaining product roadmaps, features coming out, getting my feedback on what I would like to see as a customer. Just had a really, really good experience because they're responsive.
Okay. And the majority of the vendors that you work with, did you reach out to them?
Most of them, yeah. There's been a couple products we've used in the past, like ShareFile. That was a cold call. That was a really lucky one, actually, because I said we need email encryption that day, and like 3 hours later, I got a call from a sales guy at ShareFile without me even inquiring. I was like, "Hey, man, it's your lucky day."
Okay, that's a nice coincidence. So is there any way vendors can actually connect to you in a non-intrusive manner?
Probably through LinkedIn or even Twitter.
Okay.
I'm most active on Twitter because I get on LinkedIn and I see all the fluff marketing and hype, and it really kind of rubs me the wrong way. So
Got it. So I'm assuming our listeners, if they want to connect with you online, so Twitter would be the place, right?
yeah.
Okay. Okay, nice. Is there anything you could point to be held as the single most important thing to you in your career?
I don't know.
That's a
don't know.
fair question. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
fair answer as well, right? Okay, that's fine. And you know, just before we wrap this up, I do have like a couple of non-related questions that I like to ask. If you had unlimited funds, what would you do with your life?
I don't know if I could fairly answer that. Until something like that happens, I don't think anyone really knows. Some of us would like to say, oh, I'd keep working. I'd donate as much as I could to charity, and world hunger. But it could very well may be that they leave the office that very day, never come back, and travel every day for the rest of their lives. Yeah, I mean, until you're in a situation like that, it's kind of like it's kind of like winning the lottery.
Yeah.
Until it happens, until you're under that pressure, until you have that opportunity, you really don't know.
Okay. Fair enough. Have you read or listened to anything recently that has inspired you and you wanted to share?
I don't take inspiration in the typical sense of getting inspiration of someone had this amazing experience and they wrote about it or did a podcast about it. Now I want to go and do that thing. It's what I see wrong that I can fix is what inspires me.
Okay. Okay.
Also causes me a lot of anxiety, but
Fair enough. Okay. I want to be respectful of your time, and I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to jump on this call. It was a pretty quick turnaround here, and again, I enjoyed talking with you, and hopefully the answers that you provided would resonate with some of our listeners, and maybe even potentially help some people out. And I wish to you all, all the success in your role, and just keep enjoying doing what you're doing. And yeah, thank you again.
All right, and thank you for having me on. This has been a great experience.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan.